One of the great things about posting videos is reading the comments that come back to tell me to check out new mods or give me a little more history, correct some of my errors as I'm talking through whatever I'm showing. And on the last video I did for Assetto Corsa for the F3 cars around the Südschleife, Glenn652 posted some links to some 1923 Grand Prix cars, and there's been a nice little group, a mod shaping up, a full Grand Prix mod by a user, Nice Cup of Tea, over at Race Department, who's gone through and made 3 cars from the 1923 French Grand Prix. The Bugatti Type 32, the Voisin C6, and the Sunbeam Grand Prix car. This is 3 of, I think, 5 different or 6 different cars that would have raced in that Grand Prix, and it really is awesome to have different examples of Grand Prix cars this old. I don't think I've seen any other race cars of this age. This would have been as Grand Prix racing as we know it was first starting to come about. And so it was a race in Tours, France, which had 20 or so cars racing it, and these are 3 examples of those. So I thought it would be interesting to try all 3 out and see what the differences might have been on these very early automobiles, these early race cars. And looking for tracks, Tours is not a track that's available as far as I can tell for Assetto Corsa, but there is this awesome circuit called Fontany, if I'm pronouncing that right. This is a semi-fictional track. I believe the roads are real roads, but the circuit itself wouldn't have been a circuit cars really raced on. It's created by the Fat Alpha user who's made a bunch of other awesome tracks for Assetto Corsa, and it's described as the French Nürburgring, and I'd have to agree. This is one hell of a circuit, and one that suits these cars quite well. It's very different than the Tours race would have been. That track was basically a triangle with lots of straight lines. This one quite twisty, but I think it'll give me a good opportunity to see these 3 cars and what might be different about them. So I want to do basically 3 races here today, 1 lap each, which sounds short, but this is a long track. I think it's something like 25 kilometers around. So 1 lap each, starting from the rear of the grid in each of these 3 1923 race cars. And to start things out, I'm going to try the Bugatti Type 32. And so why don't we get going? I'll talk about it as we race. So here we are at the back of the grid in our Bugatti, engine right below our feet, spitting flames, lights are fully lit, out, we're underway to start our 1 lap race. We got another Bugatti right in front of us, an engine backfiring as we shift up into 2nd gear. Basically, every time we let off the throttle, a big bang from below us. I'm sure that would make things awful warm during a race, but we'll stream here towards the first corner, see if I can throw it up the inside here. We got Bugatti right in front of us and a Voisin Laboratoire right next to him. Very strange looking cars. We'll drive that one in a second. But now onto the twisty roads and see if we can pass a couple of these cars. So we'll head towards the twisting section. I have done some practice laps around this track, but it's such a big circuit, it would take quite a long time to learn very well. So main goal here is to keep it on the racetrack and avoid the other cars and complete the lap. Things will be very tight here for the first part of the first lap. Engine backfire basically takes over every time you let off the throttle. I guess they would be running really rich fuel mixture would make the engine do something like that. Probably not uncommon for cars. You see the Bugatti in front, also flames coming out the tailpipes. And this is a slipstreamed car, so basically it was a kind of a fad or a practice done in the 1920s, essentially, to take metalwork and anything fast, you just cover it all up and try to make it slippery looking like a water drop, and obviously there's some truth to that being quicker. Well, there's a car in front running pretty wide there, but for a car like this, it probably just made it heavier. This car, I guess in a straight line, would maybe use the bodywork, but apparently the bodywork actually created a rising condition in some circumstances. the effects of the airfoil not being fully understood at this point is, whoa, I see a car flying through the air in front. We'll try to slow down a little bit. Oh, and a couple sunbeams there off the circuit. RIP for certain during these times. So now we'll come through. Got a little bit of a tight section coming up here. So we're stuck in behind Bugatti here, the white one. The mod author included a few extra paint schemes than would have been real for this. I think all of the 4 examples that the Bugatti created would be more traditionally French blue. One in front though, painted like an American car with stars around the driver's helmet. Add something fun to race against here, allow us to have a full field of cars. Is rocketing over some cobblestones there. The bodywork just shaking. Second gear as we go up the hill. Car is struggling for a little bit of pace, so don't want to use third just yet. Let's see if we can duck it on the inside. Dirt pulled onto the circuit, and this whole circuit is just amazingly detailed. Like I said, it's real roads, but not a real racing circuit. The mod author has built it to basically be in the time period of the 60s, I think. But there's nothing here that's offensive to racing, you know, earlier cars on it. It still gives a great impression of what very old racing might have been like. Maybe a little less dirt on the roads than would have been there, but a very fitting track in my opinion for these types of cars. So I'll go through a little bit of a switchback here. Boy, another backfire from the engine. And then down here to a very tight left-hander. I've definitely not thrown the car into some of these houses on the outside during my practice. But then back on the throttle. And a quirk, or I guess a quality of these cars, the engines are much more suited for the suspension and tires of the time. I think a lot of folks tried out in the Spirit of Speed video the late 30s Grand Prix cars, and the thing that makes those so difficult is we really figured out how to make very powerful engines, but the brakes and the tires are basically unchanged from what we're racing on here. This matches a bit more, and therefore the car is actually quite drivable. Those later Grand Prix cars, you know, still the pre-war stuff, but right to World War II, are extremely hard to drive because they basically have ridiculous amounts of horsepower and the same tires that we're racing on here. We'll go down to second gear though. Fly through another village. The church reminds me almost a little bit of where I'm from here in New England. Cars in front using a little bit of the dirt there. See the Sunbeam. Now that's what I would think is a more common looking type of Grand Prix car compared to this Bugatti and the Voisin, but together it makes a very cool combination. Better than a one-class race by far. Another backfire from the engine as we come up over a crest here. Just kind of babying the throttle. Can't really press anything hard. Oh, as the car's off in front, sneaking back onto the circuit. I don't know what's over these hills, so I can't really go diving over them. It's a track I would like to learn a little bit more though. It's a really fun circuit, and I can see myself racing here quite a lot more. It'll be interesting as I try out the other 2 cars here if they improve racing at all. Nice and wide circuit. And a long straight section, so we're in third gear. That's the top gear for this car. Something that was one of the qualities of this car that helped it stand out were the gears, apparently. The 2 in front jockeying back and forth. We'll get down to second gear here. Don't use first very much, but there are a couple very tight corners coming up that we will probably use it for. Back up to third. We'll We'll go back down to second here. See if we can throw it up the inside, getting a little bit of a block. There is no mirror in this car. You would have had actually a riding mechanic with you in these cars. The mod author noted that he had one in here, however, it made it look like you were driving around a corpse because they can't be animated apparently in Assetto Corsa, which I thought was pretty funny. So just going with the single driver for now, or I think all of these cars would have had two, is throwing it up the inside there. The Sunbeams is now will come to basically a carousel, and I'm not going to be able to take the carousel this time as we're on the outside. Car very sideways under braking, use the engine a lot to brake there, really revving the hell out of it, something you definitely would not do in real life. This was more of a game of attrition than a motor race in the way we think about it. And that's why the cars look so experimental as we're staring at the back of a Voisin, very weird, unconventional looking car. Oh, there's the Sunbeam on the inside, gonna run us a little wide. Ooh, somehow avoiding those trees there, getting smacked in the face by some branches. Man. But the cars do look, to me, somewhat like some of those solar-powered cars do today in some of the science type, events that aren't really racing. It's more just seeing who can get to the finish first. So this side-by-side battering wheels is not something that you would have seen. That's much more of a new idea of racing. This is the old racing where we're just trying to get to the finish line as I run a little wide, getting it back on the circuit before I hit a sign. I'm streaming down the hill. I think we're getting close to the end of the lap. I love how the backfire essentially mutes all the rest of the sounds. Whoa, there we go. Running a little wide. Took me longer than I thought it would. Dancing between light poles. Right and left and right. Kept it in third gear, should have gone down to second there. The engine is just as important as the brakes for slowing the car down, maybe more important, to be honest. You can put the pedal, or the brake pedal, all the way to the floor and it won't actually lock up the tires unless you're going fairly slow. Alright, here we come to the twisty part, I believe. We'll use that engine to slow it down. The hill. The Voisin trying to get up the hill with the Sunbeam in front, bogging down a little bit, but making our way around. Big backfire. So let's see if we can throw it up the inside. Not able to do it. Set back in the slipstream here if we can. A little bit of a straight piece of circuit. Oh, car running wide. Into the bushes. Where am I? Oh, somehow making it out. To shake the leaves off my uniform after that one. Back up to third gear. That certainly would not have been a good thing. Over the top of a ridge now. See if we can maybe get by this guy again in the Voisin. Second gear. Up to third. So I think we're right at the end of the lap now. At least I think we are. There's a few bits of this circuit that look somewhat the same, and it's one of those things you gotta learn. You gotta learn first where the parts are that you need to slow down for. This being one of those, all the way down to first gear, car locking up a little bit, into the second of the carousel type corners, rocking over the concrete. Certainly would not be good for any part of this automobile. Be very nervous that this thing would just fall apart, and most of them did. Side by side. Not sure exactly where the road goes here. To a hairpin third corner with the concrete banking. This having to run really wide. Basically did not get the line there. So we got one of the Bugattis coming up my right side. There, we'll see racing down the hill. And there we go, coming back onto the start-finish straight, throwing into the third gear, and just hope we have enough acceleration to keep the guys behind us there. So we'll come to the line to end the race in the Bugatti. So sitting at the back of the grid again, but this time in the Voisin Laboratoire C6. Lights are out, we're underway. And if you're thinking, is that a propeller at the front of the car? You'd be right, that is a propeller. This thing is a literal, or almost a literal aircraft as we're gonna work our way down to the first corner. I'll explain a little bit more about what that means. We'll see if we can get the jump on a couple of these cars. We'll come down to the first turn, brake plenty early, and just baby it in here. Second gear. This car also has 3 gears. It's getting all kinds of sideways, even under slow speed like that, but regaining control. As now we'll head up the hill and into the forest a bit. So this, I almost wanted to call it an aircraft. This car was built by Voisin. It's one of the Bugattis squeezes by there. Voisin was an aircraft manufacturer in the First World War, I believe, and I think grew disenchanted with making things that could kill people. So he made a car like this, which by today's standards would kill people, but is relatively peaceful compared to the planes of the First World War. And so this thing carries a lot of aviation technology with it. It really was a Grand Prix car, but one built like an airplane, I guess you could say. The whole car's shape was shaped like a wing. Ooh, as one of the Voisin in front of me run wide. Shaped like a wing, but he did it correctly. Unlike the Bugatti. Bugatti was shaped like a wing, but it was upside down, so it actually created lift. And this car, shaped like a wing, was facing the right way, so potentially it could create downforce. I think in reality, it created very little, but a really interesting concept and a wacky looking car. So we'll get in here behind the American looking Bugatti. 3 gears again just on this one. And overall, I can say already, it's my first time driving it, but it feels quite a bit different from the Bugatti. It's not as nimble. I'm not sure which car was actually heavier than the other, but this one certainly has longer wheelbase, so it's gonna be a little slower to corner, but a little more stable. Brake. No brakes on this thing. Basically threw it on the inside because I had no other option there. We'll twist our way here past the picket fences, then onto the cobblestones, past the crowds. Honestly, I said this before, but these things remind me of some of those solar-powered cars of today. The ones that do the experimental racing. And it really was experimental racing back in these times. Getting all kinds of crossed up. Once again, I can literally put my foot to the floor in this on the brake, and it won't lock up the tires. There's just no brakes. Got to use that engine to slow the car down, but we'll see the best we can do. It feels overall maybe a little slower on the straight than the Bugatti was, but because it's a little more stable, I'm finding the corners, maybe I'm not super far off while riding the top of the gears. Certainly there would be no rev limiter on this car back in the day. A little bit of safety there for us in sim. And still getting a little bit of a backfire when I let off the throttle, but nowhere near what we were getting in the Bugatti. Is now coming over the crest there. We'll head down the hill and towards this left-hander. Recognize this one. And you'd almost think that little propeller on the front, I mentioned it, that's not providing any sort of thrust for the car or anything like that. No, that's a propeller, and it's spinning to help cool the car down. It is not using wind or anything to cool the car down, but the air coming at the car from our speed is spinning the propeller, and that powers some mechanical mechanisms in the car that actually pump maybe coolant or something through. I don't know quite the full story of how it works, but it does provide an actual aid. It's quite ingenious, something like that. I mean, I think today the ramming air power is enough to cool, cars, but they've got spinning fans, electrical fans now. This somewhat similar idea to take a propeller, run air over it, that's going to provide some kind of energy that then you can use to turn, some kind of cooling mechanisms and things. Pump fluid or something like that through the engine. Pretty cool as we're working behind one of these cars, and you'll notice, you can see my front tires and you can see the one in front. One of the oddest things, and I think what makes this car look so strange, is the fact, it's one of the Sunbeams, rockets by, and we're all gonna go into the grass there. That's the correct line, right? We'll see if we can stick it up the inside. But the front tires, open wheels sticking out much wider than the rear, somewhat like a reverse delta wing. The rear of this car looks like the front of the delta wing to me, and it's such an odd concept, something you really don't see in cars ever visually, especially that the axles would be different widths. Make it look very unique, if not a better word for it. And the roar of this engine really makes it sound like an airplane motor. We'll fly down the hill. Leave a tighter series of corners coming up here, maybe braking a little early. No rear view. Like I said before, with the Bugatti, you would have a co-pilot tapping you on the shoulder to let you know if somebody's coming up behind you. And they would not be racing like they do today. There would be no bumping. This is purely, let's get to the end. The car will fail long before you have to worry about passing. As there goes a Bugatti flying past. It's certainly quicker on the straights, the Bugatti is. But I think driving-wise, I'll say this car feels a little nicer as we're about halfway through the first lap I've ever driven with it. Whoa. And if you think that was a good move, it was unintentional. There was just no brakes. Threw it down into second gear and crossed my fingers there. These two in front, testing how wide the roads really are here. Oh, and no space at all. A lot of drivers retiring. Sluggish up the hill. Definitely a momentum automobile. It can get going very quick, but it is definitely slow going. And I really do love the sound of it. Not sure, the mod author explains that there's a lot of guesswork involved with these cars. There's one example of this car, which is a reproduction, so not really an original, and the engines are one of the main things that you really can't reproduce this type of engine. Oh, as we're coming down to the tight hairpin, you using all of the engine power to brake the car. I'm making myself look good by almost messing up. Twisty bits here. Guide ourselves through the forests of France. I cannot get enough of this circuit. Absolute awesome stuff. If you want roads to drive on, real roads, this is about as real as it gets. Tipping out into a field, using all of the road. Hopefully nobody gonna come up behind me. Signs, using the signs on the sides of the circuit to help me understand where there might be turns to slow down for. It might as well be the first lap I've ever done in this circuit because I do have no idea where I am. Very drivable car though. I'd agree, similar idea to the Bugatti as we're going to oversteer. Or understeer really off the circuit, get it back on. I can hear some cars behind me. I'll try to keep it in front. Somehow not hitting anything there. But similar to the Bugatti, this car just has the right amount of power for the traction. It very much flat foot. You can drive it a little more like a modern car. I do want to do some videos with the 30s automobiles just to show how terrifying it is to strap hundreds of horsepower onto these type of tires. Wind our way up the hill here, closing in a little bit on the cars in front. And just surprised how much you can use the wheel to save it. The wheel, let's talk about that for a second, basically holding a rectangle in this car. Nothing feels quite like a car. It's all a little foreign, and I think that's because of the airplane origins of this thing. We'll work our way past one of the Bugattis there. A Sunbeam in front. Much lower to the ground in this car, and that definitely helps the cornering, I'd imagine. Down to second gear. Boys, we'll run it wide again. I did this last time. Through the bush. Oh, and I do not know where we're going. Go back through the bush. Up through the rev range of what can't be more than a couple thousand RPM. Or I think I see the gauge there, sitting around 37, 3800 RPM. The car under us, skating around the track. You merely suggest where you want the car to go. Oh, it's one of the Sunbeams headed by us here. Give him a little bit of space. I believe coming down to the second of the carousel type corners. This left-hander goes into this right first gear. Slowing down successfully for it. No small feat in itself. And this left-hander. Oh, just nudging with the front of the car, the Sunbeam in front. A nice thud. So we make contact with, no doubtedly, a wood car. If the steering is not messed up after that. I'm a little crooked. there could be a lot of fun to be had in these cars. It'll be interesting. You know, this just isn't the thing that seems to appeal to a lot of folks driving, but I bet you could have some of the best online races with these types of cars. This will spin out the Sunbeam and come to the front straightaway to end our lap and little race in the Voisin. An interesting car for sure, but I am very eager to get into the Sunbeam and see how that compares to both this and the Bugatti. So we'll cross the line here, round out the race. So here we are in the third of our three cars. This is the Sunbeam Grand Prix. Lights are lit. Out. We're underway and a wheel spinning off the line. I love the car in front. Tail wagging. Mine doing much the same. So we'll now work our way towards the first corner. Car accelerating quite well here. And the two in front gonna have to get on the binders a little bit. Put it back down into second gear. Everyone trying to find their places now. We'll come into the first corner. Just ease it through on the inside. Somebody crunching their gearbox next to me there. And coming out, second gear still. This car is pulling really well. Heading up the hill. Find our place in the outside. We have one of the Sunbeams to our right there, a nice red one. This car most likely would have been green in the race. Cars racing for their countries in these days. So the Bugattis are blue. The Sunbeam, I believe this is a British type version. I'll talk more about that in a second, but it would have been green. German cars, of course, would have been silver, etc. We'll come down the inside. We'll have a lot of grip available, a little bit of oversteer, but very catchable. All three of these cars have been very easy, I would say, to, you're going to oversteer a lot and slide around, but it's not so hard to catch it on the wheel. So we'll go up the middle, and just tipping. Hopefully not sending that Sunbeam into the forest. We'll just keep our eyes pointed forward on that one. So come to the bottom of the hill past a red Bugatti, making up a lot of places. I can already tell you, I think this is the quickest out of the three, at least in the sim. And it would be quick. This is the car which really won the 1923 French Grand Prix. Not running away, it was just happened to last the longest, I think. Was not the outright quickest car, it seems, but like I was saying, motorsport in these days was almost more about whether the car could make the distance more so than the driver wheeling it. So come to this slow right-hander on the inside of a Voisin. Give him a little space here, but I think we got that position. Coming up to the number 12, I think, green Sunbeam. That would be the car which won the race. And the Sunbeam, so as far as I can tell, these were a type of Grand Prix car which were created for quite a few years, and more maybe of a rule set for Grand Prix cars. So we'll sneak it past another Bugatti there. So this is a 1923 Sunbeam. It's not the only 1923 Sunbeam. They would all look different, but this one is modeled after the one which won the race. But it's more of a class of car as far as I can tell. Just like the other two, source material quite hard to come by for this. So it's a bit of an amalgamation of a few years of Grand Prix cars, but altogether it creates quite the impression. And I'm definitely smiling driving this one. This is a really, really cool car. So we'll come down to the slow left-hander, really starting to learn this circuit now, just with a limited number of laps. Starting to recognize some places where I know I'm going to have to slow down. Being able to talk through that crazy oversteer, it's very catchable. up in the distance Bugatti, but you can tell just by how much easier it's been to get past cars that this is the superior car to the other two, and much more conventional looking. And I think we look at this and say, okay, well, that looks more like, a Grand Prix car, at least the evolution of a Grand Prix car, than the Bugatti or the Voisin do. But that's for a good reason, because people saw this car did well, and then they developed more cars like it. The other two were more likely dead ends, although I can see some stuff from the Bugatti maybe in some sports cars, but the Voisin is an interesting creature. I've seen some videos of folks, this will come this corner a little slower, make sure we don't run onto that grass there, really easy to do. Past the church, that's my landmark. This car, I've seen some videos of folks racing it around the Donington circuit, 1938 version. And I contemplated doing this video at that circuit. I thought this was a more interesting venue, but this car around that circuit, I now want to do that really badly, because I can see that being a ton of fun. It's a lot easier of a car to manage than some of those 30s Grand Prix cars. So we'll dip it onto the grass there. Fast section here, trying to remember if there's how this ends really. Where do we have to slow down next? Getting towards maybe a top speed in this, and it just feels really fast, quite frightening. But the weight balance is really good overall, and I'm not feeling, I thought I was going to feel like I'm a little top heavy just because of how much taller this car is than the other two, but it feels very balanced and quite nice. Coming up to this left-hander, but I think it's more of a dab of the brakes than a slowing down corner, and then I can see in front of me the right-hander, which we have to slow down for. Kind of nice only having 3 gears too, and you don't have to shift very often. This car has a very long second gear, it seems. Oh, gonna run a little wide into the Bugatti there. Able to get away with it somehow. I think we both survived that. Onto the bridge. Dipping on the dirt. Whew, we're racing now. And that would just be like super unrealistic for this time period, doing any kind of contact. You had wooden wheels in a lot of places. This one looks like it may have actually had metal wheels, but not the type of racing where you would hit each other for sure. So these 1923 cars, just so interesting to me. It really was the beginnings of auto racing. There was auto racing before this, but as far as I can tell, this is some of the oldest stuff available for Assetto Corsas. We locked the wheels coming in, getting down into first gear. Car did not like that so much. Somehow able to get through there. I would be interested if there are older cars, but I feel like this might be hitting some kind of sweet spot. Like I mentioned, the horsepower is appropriate for the chassis, for the suspension, for the tires. Anything before this, you're going to be starting to get to really slow cars, which will handle fine, most likely, but they're just going to be very slow. It'd be hard to tell if they'd be compelling in a sim. Whereas stuff later than this, you start to get into the 1930s stuff, which is extremely interesting in its own right. However, it becomes a handful to drive with just the amount of horsepower they're shoving through these types of cars. Not a second gear then. So I do think this early 20s period is an interesting time to sim, and it's a ton of fun. I could see an online race with these cars being so much fun, and it's a pity that more folks don't enjoy doing this. We'll slow down a bit more for this one this time. Now remember, I don't see people racing these types of cars too much, but it would be fun to do. it'd be fun to, I don't know if you could ever figure out a way to do it with two people. One could be the mechanic on board, one could be the driver. Somebody organize that. I will do it. Streaking behind this yellow Sunbeam now. I think out of all the cars, this could be one that you could imagine in some other colors, considering it is a car which is more of a make in a series and not necessarily a specific car. This one is, but the whole Sunbeam thing. Oh, so coming up the hill, a lot of understeer there. Just bogging down in second, but able to make it work. I think first gear's super short. Now this might be the leader. I've passed a lot more cars. Oh, I see one more way up there. So at least one more. Hard on the brakes, track falls away. This is a hard corner. I've been running wide there. I love how there's a little bench on the inside of the circuit there. You can, I guess, sit and watch the cars go by. Work our way through this French village now. I do want to learn more about where this fictional circuit is, because they are supposedly real roads, but done up as though it was a Grand Prix circuit, and just such amazing detail. Come down the hill now. I think towards the bottom here is where the last couple of really slow corners are. Trying to remember where we gotta brake. Keeping an eye on the car in front, starting to slow down now, down to second gear. Yeah, it's gonna go really tight to the left here, and then even tighter to the right. There we go. It's crossed over. A lot of steering angle required, but it feels really good. And running a little wide. It seems like the racing line is quite forgiving in these. And the last tight carousel-like corner, put it into first for this one. I'm just gonna run to the outside of it. I'll get that power down. Spin the rears. Want to try to get around this car, but I'm not quite sure how much space I have. This end of the circuit is very complicated. This will come now onto the straightaway, so not going to do it, but completing the lap in the Sunbeam. What a great car. I think out of the three, this is my favorite one. Maybe not for the history, but for the driving. So we'll come finish. I think we're going to finish in third place then. So overall, I think what Nice Cup of Tea at Race Department has created is really unique and awesome to see. Three cars from the same Grand Prix, fourth apparently on the way with the Alfa Romeo. That'll round out. I think there's a couple more cars, but significant amount of the field used those four. And it'll just be another great addition to what's already a lot of fun. Obviously, you know, driving the three, I'd have to say the Sunbeam is definitely my favorite. Cornering wise, obviously has the power, makes you feel a little like a racing god racing the Bugatti and the Voisin, but it feels really fun and something I want to try to take around some of these other older circuits and just see what it can really do. The Bugatti, an interesting car, very nimble, and I think could be quickest around a really tight circuit, but anything faster like this or long sweeping corners, the Sunbeam's probably going to win. And then the Voisin, what a unique butterfly of a car that is, with the propeller on the front and wacky looking suspension. Just shows how folks are trying to be, create something new. Ingenuity definitely at a high rate in these days. So overall, could not be having more fun with Assetto Corsa and with a mod like this. Let me know if there's more stuff out there that you think I would like trying or you want exposed for other folks to see. I love racing these old cars. I think I might start going a little newer than this with future videos, but really interested to try whatever else is out there. And so I appreciate everybody watching. Until next time, thank you.